This is the Clean Energy Show with Brian Stockton and James Whittingham.
Hello and welcome to episode 67 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, PBS Nova covers electric aviation. We talk about Australia again, despite the fact that their citizens refuse to listen to our podcast. And 7-Eleven is serving up Slurpees and electrons. A Toyota factory employee calls us to say, James, stop complaining about Toyota not having EVs. They're coming. Plus a possible increase to the federal EV tax credits in the United States. That was a big intro. We've got so much this week. Episode 67. We're a content factory, Brian. Factory of content. It's never stopping. Anyway, everyone, if you're new to the show, there's a lot of people who are new to this show. Our listenership has gone way up in the last month. This is our weekly conversation about clean tech and transportation. And our thesis here on the show is that the world is changing rapidly and will be very different by 2030, Brian.
Yeah, it's really a limited series podcast that will take us to the year 2030, we assume.
We assume the world will be a different place in 2030 with electrified transportation, robotaxis.
Yeah, so I know we're going to talk about Toyota later in the show, but I want to complain about Subaru for a second.
Please.
So I took a little road trip this weekend up to Saskatoon, our sister city in our province, and there's a supercharger halfway. Got some really fast supercharging speed. But one of the things I enjoy about driving a Tesla is they're still pretty rare around here. Electric cars are still quite unusual, so you often get approached by people. And I got approached by a Subaru owner. He was there gassing up. There's gas pumps, and then there's the Tesla supercharger. And he was really disappointed that Subaru has not been moving in the realm of electric. He's maybe thinking of plug-in hybrid, but Subaru doesn't even have that. But it was quite interesting. He was asking about how the superchargers work. He was confused because there's no display on them. There's no readout. And so, people think of them as analogous to gas pumps, and that's true. But at a Tesla supercharger, there's no display at all. So he wanted to know, how does that work? How do you get charged? And I explained that you plug it in and the car kind of talks to the central computer. But I still don't think he quite got it.
My best friend in childhood was fascinated by those things in the gas pumps where they're a little clear bubble that move around quickly.
Yeah.
And we were friends since we were 4. And when he was really young, he thought testicles were for that. When you peed, that they run around like that thing in the bubble to show that you were going. Maybe if we put those on superchargers, people will understand it. Because I don't know, it's some third party chargers have displays, right?
Yeah, the third-party chargers are very much like gas pumps, which is, again, the source of more confusion. But, Tesla's got the simplest system. And I tried to explain that. They've got the best system because it's all automatic. But, it makes it maybe a harder concept to grasp because most cars aren't connected to the internet all the time. So I maybe should have said that. Oh, the car is always connected to the internet and so forth. But anyway.
Brian, it seems like yesterday we were talking about how bloody cold it was and how there was a blizzard followed. Every nice day it was followed by a blizzard. And now there's a heat warning.
It was very recent. That was only a couple of episodes ago.
That's where we live. We live in southern Canada, and the weather goes from winter to summer very quickly. We can be minus 40 or plus 40 Celsius here.
Well, you know what we have, James? It's called a continental climate. Because we're more or less in the middle of the continent of North America. And so what that means is the weather's not moderated by oceans or even, the Great Lakes or something like that. So we get the extremes. So, it's going up to plus 36 here probably tomorrow, which is in the 90s Fahrenheit. And even though, we were complaining of blizzards just a couple of weeks ago.
I've got my steel up above ground pool running. Which is good because the pandemic has added a great deal of weight to me, but I'm lighter in the pool. You see, Brian, when you gain fat on land, you become lighter in the water world. And by the way, I watched the Oscar-winning documentary, My Octopus Teacher. Very, very good.
Yeah, I watched that too. That was pretty wild. He got some amazing footage.
Yes, and an amazing story. And my wife fell asleep during the two most crucial scenes in the film that I can't tell her about to spoil it, but there's some pretty remarkable things that take place in the film. Yeah, I watched it because I watched another documentary that was nominated called, what was it called? It was about the camp for disabled youth in the 70s, and
Crip Camp?
Crip Camp, and I really enjoyed that one, and was raving about it for days. My wife is a social worker, but she can't get her social worker friends to watch that documentary. They said, you have to watch RuPaul's Drag Race an episode first, and maybe we'll consider, come on, people. You've got a bachelor's degree. Can you not watch a documentary? They're very entertaining, these documentaries, and both had very interesting footage that was basically made into a documentary that was unusual to have that sort of access and footage to something like the subject matter.
No, we're in a great era for documentaries these days. Some really great stuff.
Well, we talk a lot about TV and film here. Brian's a film professor. I don't know, I work. Somebody asked me the other day, I took my son for clothes and at a snooty clothing store because we had a store credit there. Long story about that. And he said, finally it came. So I was there in my Walmart jeans and a sweatshirt, and he says, "So, sir, what do you do for a living?" He said, "I work in the film industry," which is a lie because there is no film industry anymore where we live. And I didn't want to say I'm a podcaster and a freelance.
That's even worse.
Yeah, it is, a freelance creative person. I don't know this is the question I hate most, Brian, in the whole world is, what do you do? That you did a nationally televised documentary with me as a subject explaining that very thing. I don't know how to answer that question. But here I am talking to you people about clean energy and transportation. And let's get started, Brian. Where do you want to start this week?
Let's start in my favorite country, my favorite continent, Australia.
Yay, Australia. No one's listening.
No, nobody cares. But yeah, I've actually got 3 stories from Australia this week. Three clean energy stories. The first one is that Electric is reporting that Tesla aims to secure $1 billion a year in battery minerals from Australia. So it turns out that they already get a lot of their lithium from Australia and also their nickel. And they've just announced that they have increased basically their contracts. And so Tesla is going to be sending $1 billion a year to Australia to buy minerals for their batteries, despite the fact that, EV adoption in Australia, as we've discussed, is still pretty small at this point.
Yes, it is. And I know from the internet that people are not happy about that. There's a lot of people there who complain about the time it takes to get an EV, the price they are when they finally get there. It's kind of like the problem Canada has, but amplified many times over. So I feel sorry for them. Yeah,
in Canada, we have a history of doing kind of a similar thing, of supplying resources, but not so much a history of actually making things. We have we tend to have a resource extraction type economy, but there has been talk lately in Canada of actually taking our mineral supply and maybe making some kind of a EV battery factory.
Well, we should. I think the figure of $1 billion has to wake somebody up, doesn't it? I mean, come on. I think our country would like $1 billion from one company. Sure. What else is happening in Australia? That's one. What's number 2?
They had a coal power plant in Australia explode.
Really?
Yes.
Like spontaneous combustion of air particles?
Well, I don't know the details, and I don't know how big the explosion was, but as we've discussed before, the world's largest battery storage for the grid is in Australia. It may not be the world's largest anymore, but they had an explosion at the Callide Power Station in Queensland, Australia, and obviously that's a huge blow to the grid. But the Tesla battery that's down there, the gigantic Hornsdale Power Reserve, stepped in and was able to, fill in for a coal plant exploding. And again, it's all of these things to do with fossil fuels. We take them for granted because they've been around for 100 years. But the truth is, they're all extremely dangerous.
And what's story number 3?
Story number 3 from Australia, where nobody listens to our podcast.
They will, Brian. One day they will. We'll go down there if we have to. We'll drive down there in your Model 3.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I assume it's amphibious.
So The Guardian is reporting that an Australian court finds the government has a duty to protect young people from a climate crisis. So 8 teenagers and an 86-year-old nun launched a case to prevent the approval of a massive coal mine in Australia. And they won their case, although it sounds like the judge stopped short of actually issuing an injunction. So I'm a little bit confused. It was a victory, but without an injunction, there's no sort of teeth to apply to it. But, this builds on the story we had last week about Shell Oil being forced now by the Dutch government to reduce their emissions by 2030 to follow the Paris Climate Accord. So I think we're going to see more and more of this up to 2030, people challenging all of these fossil fuel developments in the courts because, it seems to work. Now, courts are always very slow. That's the downside of it. And, Shell Oil is certainly going to appeal that decision. I don't know if this one has to be appealed because there's no injunction, but it's a slow process, but it's definitely going to be part of what we see going forward in the transition to 2030.
Brian, that story about Shell that we had last week was huge. And I keep reading about how huge it was. Very prominent people are saying, most people don't, the media included, don't understand what a big deal this is. So look that up. That case against Shell, which was brought on last weekend and was ruled against them. So
it sets a precedent of some kind. Now, what kind of precedent that is, I'm not exactly clear on, because of course, courts in different countries all have kind of different rules and laws, and it's a direct precedent that may only apply in Holland. I'm not sure, but it shows a path forward to win in court against fossil fuels.
And it seems like it's definitely is going to impact. I mean, everyone's saying that it's going to impact other people, that once the ruling comes down, it's. By the way, our listener, Chuck Prentice, I retweeted this on Twitter, but he contacted us and said he recommends checking out an Australian podcast called Climate Conversations, which I've not heard before. But, really, should we be listening to an Australian podcast if Australians are not listening to us? That's the question before you.
That's a good point. I put that in my podcast queue. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I think I'll listen and then give my judgment.
But it'll be a harsh judgment. So, Brian, I was watching, I'm very thankful that I have my DVR on my TV to set to record Nova in case there's anything I'm ever interested in, because I went through my list of recorded programs and it said Nova, Electrified Transportation. And I almost peed myself, which is not a big deal because I'm getting fairly incontinent in my old age, but I recorded a bit from my couch. This is what it sounded like.
We believe it's going to happen sooner than most people imagine. If you fly on small commuter airlines today, you can expect some version of electric aircraft within the next 5 years.
Today it's hard to see, but it may just be a matter of time.
It was wonderful. I really liked it. It wasn't just fluff. It wasn't just filling time and repeating itself over and over. It was well investigated. It was done by Miles O'Brien, who you heard there. And I love Miles O'Brien. He's a former CNN reporter, an aviation expert because he's a pilot. He also lost his arm on a plane when some cargo dislodged. So he's armless.
Oh, really?
He has no arm. You may have noticed the hook for his left arm.
Yeah, I noticed he had
that's how it happened.
Yeah.
And I'm very sad for him because I like him a lot, and I've been watching him for years. He's guided me through the odd shuttle disaster, and been a very smart man and a very good voice to hear. So I really like him, and I assume because he's a pilot that he initiated this. They shot it for over a year, since before the pandemic, and I thought it was very thorough and very real. What'd you think?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I thought it was great. There was, just that one bit alone where one of the experts in the documentary said, small commuter planes within 5 years. I thought that was really interesting. The part about the contrails, I wasn't really aware of that before. Obviously jets burn a lot of fuel and that creates a lot of CO2, but how the exhaust turns into air, water crystals or ice crystals in the air, and that can actually trap a lot of heat. And I think they said it does twice as much as the CO2 in terms of greenhouse gas. So, I learned a lot from it. It was great.
That jumped out at me too, and the reason why is because I've seen a study that was published in the newspapers, I think about a year ago, that said, it was during the pandemic, because they're actually studying it. It's one of the many things that they'll be able to study during this unusual time, is that it was reflecting. The contrails were reflecting light, so it was cooling there. So it's one of those things where both may be true. And or one may not be. I mean, one study doesn't mean everything.
Yeah, and it might depend on individual circumstances. So it might actually, be good one day and bad another day. The other thing I was struck by was those professors that were driving around in an electric car, looked like a Chevy Bolt, and they were measuring exhaust basically from nearby airports.
Right.
And I grew up right underneath the flight path of our local airport. So it made me nervous about all of the jet fumes that I've breathed in over the years. But yeah, basically there's, and I imagine when jets are taking off is when they use the most fuel.
Yes.
And it's basically a big cloud of exhaust that falls over whatever city is nearby, the airports. And, they found these clouds of exhaust from airports were kind of spread out much, much larger than they thought they were.
We live in a small city with relatively little air travel, but we've both lived in Toronto. I remember when you arrive in Toronto and get out of the airport, you smell a lot of jet fuel, because it's nonstop ground and takeoff and land.
Oh yeah, there's flights landing or taking off every minute, I would assume.
So this documentary covered things we've talked about before: converting old aircraft to electric. Same company that's doing it for Vancouver is working on it in the States. They're looking at a commuter airplane of 6 to 7 people. It's interesting. The technology of airplanes is like EVs or anything else. It's like it's smooth, it's quiet. That's a big deal, and it's also simple and has low maintenance. So, as we've said before in the show, when people one of the aircraft applications right now today is, and it's happening in Australia, is that they're using electric aircraft for flight schools, because instead of paying $200 for a flight lesson just for the gas, you can go up for like $20 in electricity, or $10 or $5 or virtually nothing, and on these small aircraft, and with 2 people, and have your flight instruction, and you can get off the ground. And there's a shortage of pilots. They mentioned that in the show, that they need more pilots. So that's interesting. Plus, Miles O'Brien, when they were just, how you taxi to the runway and you get ready to take off. I've been in a small plane a few times where that happens, and the engine is going strong, and you basically have your brakes on and you're ready to go, and you're making sure that the choke is pulled and the gasoline mixture is right. And so what happens in an electric plane? Nothing. The propeller stops. It's not turning anything off. It just stops. And it's dead silent. And when you're in an airplane, you usually have your doors open, because you're not getting any winds, and in the summertime it's hot. So they had their doors open, and of course Miles O'Brien, like I said, is a pilot. That was always the most amazing thing.
Before the pandemic, aviation accounted for about 3.5% of the world's climate warming problem. About 2/3 of jet fuel exhaust is CO2. Less than 1% are nitrogen oxides, which also cause warming. The other third is mostly water vapor, which at high altitude becomes ice crystals, contrails. When the humidity is right, contrails spread and linger for hours, creating cirrus clouds. Thousands of flights, creating thousands of contrail-induced clouds, trap a lot of heat. They have about twice the impact on global warming as the CO2 from jet exhaust. Globally, about 15% of the human carbon footprint comes from transportation. we see some signs of progress. Electric car sales are rising as prices drop. But aviation? It's one of the hardest transportation problems to solve. Yet all over the world, engineers, entrepreneurs, and aviators are trying to meet the challenge.
We believe it's going to happen sooner than most people imagine. If you fly on small commuter airlines today, you can expect some version of electric aircraft within the next 5 years.
All very exciting, Brian. And they did get into hydrogen as well. And because, you need 30 times the weight in batteries than you do jet fuel. So this is an issue. Anything else to say?
No, just that it's, as we've said before, it's going to start with, smaller planes, shorter flights, but a lot of flights are already, kind of small and short. So, it's coming sooner than people think.
And of course, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, drone-like aircraft was covered as well, which I was excited to see, because it's something I haven't heard about in a couple of years, because there was a lot of talk about that. Uber got into it and then got out during the pandemic, which I didn't know. They were looking at that. So delivery drones and unmanned or unpiloted, I should say, aircraft in China was demonstrated without a pilot and flying around. That's something I think is going to happen. And one thing about that is that they are fairly quiet. They're not silent, but they're no helicopter. They're a fraction of a helicopter.
Yeah, and one thing they mentioned was that it's, as an autonomous problem, it's probably easier than solving autonomous cars because, you're up in the air and there's just kind of more space around. I mean, maybe eventually when there's 8,000
Brian,
air taxis around.
Planes do collide.
Yeah.
I watched one. There was one that collided a couple of weeks ago that I tweeted about because it had an emergency air parachute on it. It's one of these things that they're putting in personal aviation planes now. Is and he wouldn't have survived without that parachute. So you push a button, boom,
yeah,
a little firework goes off, shoots the thing up, and you land in somebody's yard and say hello.
And one of my favorite movies as a kid was Airport 75, and that was the plot of that movie. Was a small plane crashes into the front of a 747.
Because I was going to those airport movies all the time as a kid. I don't remember that one.
Yeah, no, that's my favorite one. And it was partly shot at Dulles Airport, which is my favorite airport. And so it's worth it alone just to see Dulles Airport in 1975.
Why was it your favorite airport? Why? The listeners and I want to know.
It's just architecturally super interesting. It's got a very large cable suspension roof. It's a very unusually shaped building. And I got to fly into it when we made that aforementioned documentary that you were in called My Dinner with Generation X. We got to fly through there, and it's reminiscent, of course, of one of my favorite buildings, the Moose Jaw Civic Center, which has the same kind of roof, a cable suspension roof. In fact, I even made a short video about the Moose Jaw Civic Center that's on YouTube, if anyone's interested. But it's this fantastic hockey rink built in the early 60s by my favorite architect.
What do you think?
It's time for What Do You Think? This is where I ask Brian his opinion, expert opinion. He reads everything on the internet. He's like Google. He's like a human Google. Reads everything, has an opinion on everything, and every week I look forward to asking him about what he thinks about some of the stories I've been reading about. So Musk has finally given an explanation as to why Tesla keeps increasing the Model 3 and Model Y prices. The reason is simple. Costs are increasing. This is an interesting dilemma in the auto industry right now, isn't it?
Yeah, and he said it was analogous basically to like the toilet paper shortage. Like once these parts start to become scarce, everybody starts buying up extra because they want a secure supply, and it creates the problem more so even than the shortage.
And then there's the chips shortage, right, which is affecting a lot of automakers, which is kind of scary because I'm hearing that it could be months or even a year before that rectifies itself. And the auto industry is hurting, as we know, as EV sales are up in a lot of places, but still not what they should be.
No, and it's going to be a huge problem. And Tesla's announced they're going to pay for their chips up front in hopes of securing a better supply. But who knows?
Chips, getting hungry. getting close to lunchtime. Tesla lumbar support has been removed for passengers. And at first it was a mystery, and then Elon clarifies on Twitter, of course. He says it's costly. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, well, this is an instance where Tesla could probably use a PR department because, this story comes out because a customer takes delivery of a car and they're like, wait a minute, I thought there was supposed to be a lumbar support on the passenger side. And, they tweet about it or whatever. And eventually a statement from Musk kind of explains it all. But yeah, in my Tesla, there's a lumbar support on the driver's side and on the passenger side for the front seats. And, but Tesla's in a very unique position because they're so far the only car maker that actually has data on things like lumbar support. Like, as dumb and as, small an issue as that is, everything's connected to the Tesla computer. So they know, they have the evidence of how often the lumbar support is used on the passenger side. And they just made a calculated decision. Well, we can get rid of that because it's barely ever used. And I can say with my car, we've had it for just over a year, and it's been used exactly once on the passenger side. And it was when, it took me 6 months to discover that there was any lumbar support at all because I was too lazy to read the manual. And
doesn't
somehow
it read
I
itself?
discovered it one day.
Doesn't it read itself to you? Doesn't Elon sit on the screen and read it to you?
Yeah, fireside chat. So yeah, after 6 months, I discovered it on the driver's side. But I need a lot of lumbar support, so I still have to use a pillow. So it's actually kind of a moot point for me because I use one of those Obus Form back pillows, and the Tesla one is really good. It extends quite far, but not far enough for my bad back. But anyway, yeah, one day shortly after that, I said to my partner, "Hey, did you know that there's a lumbar support on the passenger side?" And she played with it. Oh yeah, that's interesting. And then that's the only time it's been used. You're
basically like Mr. Burns. You need a lot of things to get you going in the morning. You have to physically bend your back. How did you know about the Elon Musk comparing it to toilet paper? Because Electric published a story 1 minute ago, 1 minute before you started talking about that. What do you...
maybe I saw it on Twitter or something. I don't know.
Okay. That was amazing. Well, this has been another edition of What Do You Think?
What do you think?
And now, Brian, let's move on to breaking news. BYD is introducing a bi-direction. This is hot off the press, by the way, like too hot to handle. I have to put it down on a surface that can handle heat. The BYD, the Chinese battery electric manufacturer, is introducing bi-directional electric school bus. It's a fully electric Type D school bus, and if you know what Type D is, you're smarter than me. I'm assuming it's a full-size school bus. It's got a blunt nose on it, let's put it that way, complete with smart technologies like bidirectional charging and advanced safety features. I like that. Yeah. According to Chinese automaker, its sleek design will have students wanting to step on board and go to school. I know I would. My daughter takes a school bus from our front door every morning, and they have a new school bus, and every morning you could hear it, and now you can't. But it's not electric, I don't think. It's just, an improved...
Quieter.
It's a new diesel, but it's a lot quieter than the old ones. She definitely wouldn't hear the electric ones. They're going to have to make noises so kids can hear. Of course, she's supposed to be standing out on the street. Sometimes she listens to this podcast, so I'll just mock her now. Get out on the street, be on time, and don't make the school bus wait. Brian, we have some feedback here. I'm very pleased to say that we have a voicemail message because we always love it when people leave us a voicemail message. You can do that on speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And here it is. The person's name is John Doe.
Hey guys, love listening to your podcast, and I know there's been a lot of hate for Toyota, and Lexus kind of falls into that brand. But I work in one of the Toyota factories where we produce some of their gas-powered and hybrid vehicles, and it's under wraps. We don't know the model names or anything, but we have been told by 2023 we will be producing a hybrid Toyota, or not a hybrid, a fully electric Toyota SUV and a fully electric Lexus SUV, and we are adding a lot of workers to the plant in the terms of about 1,500 is what they're saying. So that's something. Thank you. You guys have a great podcast.
Oh, stop it. Stop it. I can't stand compliments. Thank you, John Doe. I'm assuming from the southern U.S. where there's a number of Toyota factories. That's interesting. I have been ragging on Toyota a lot. Brian, I didn't ever expect that someone who works for Toyota in a factory would listen to our podcast and be a little ruffled by my ragging on Toyota for not having an EV. But he's also trying to give us some insider information. They have been in the press with this, but it's been very vague. They're calling it the Beyond Zero, BZ, or BZ, rather, depending on where you live. In Canada, it's BZ. Don't ask why, but one of those Canadian quirks where we pronounce Z differently. And they're not saying much about it. So, but I do know that Lexus has the UX300E, which is an all-electric SUV in Europe right now, basically trying to comply to their regulations. Being forced to, but it's not an EV built from the ground up. And I've watched some reviews of it, and they've been very disappointing. For one, it has 196 miles of range, or 315 kilometers, which is not impressive. But it's they call it a quirky. Top Gear calls it a quirky-looking urban SUV that sits below the NX and RX, aimed at 30-something townies, whatever that is. What's a townie? You're familiar with Britain.
Yeah, it's in Canada, we would call them a hoser.
I can't remember what a hoser was because I know we had a hoser day in high school with Bob and Doug McKenzie from SCTV, and we all had to wear toques. I remember that. And it's the only thing I ever participated in high school, I think. 30-something townies that are creative urban explorers, according to Toyota. I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is? Is that a hoser? Creative urban explorer?
No, I don't
They're
know.
creatively exploring the earth. Basically, they're saying don't leave the city limits in this thing because it's not going to charge fast. Yeah, I love Toyota. I mean, we talk about it, but the two cars I've ever bought are Toyota. Hell, I'm looking at getting a used one for my kid. Who's in university or going to university, and there's no brand. I have an Acura, and I prefer the Toyotas because they're just reliable. Just everything is just, that's a big thing with me, having driven crappy cars all my life, well into my middle age. Almost. I want reliability. There's nothing I want more than reliability. Tesla makes me nervous in that regard because there's always something. I mean, you were on the forums talking about something. What were you talking about with your Tesla?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it tried to do a software update a few days ago, and it kind of got stalled somehow. Like the Wi-Fi has been kind of spotty here, and it gave me an error that said, contact Tesla service to do this software update. And I was trying to figure out a way to do it myself because I figured I was pretty sure what the problem was, like that the software update had just cacked out halfway through. And I posted on our local Tesla forum, does anyone know how I can force restart this software update? And but we're a small community, and the Tesla mobile service technician for our area actually commented on the story on Facebook there, and he was able to fix it over the internet. So
really?
It was amazing that Tesla could fix the car over the internet. But of course, it was an internet problem to begin with. So, the problem wouldn't have existed without those issues. But he was able to remotely force it to start the software update again. And once it went through,
and all he had to do was post a comment on Facebook on the local Tesla owners group. That's amazing.
It's very strange, yeah. But that's how it worked. But yeah, if you're looking for like a used gas car, I do think Toyota is probably your best bet. They have always been excellent, reliable used cars. I've never actually owned a Toyota, but I've always coveted them.
Well, the hybrid Priuses that Prii that we've owned, they're built for utilitarian use and mileage. They're not zippy. They're not unzippy. I mean, they're great and they're quiet and they have a fairly nice ride to them. But the SUV that they have in Europe takes about 50 minutes to charge from 0 to 80, and the battery's not that big. So I'm assuming their efficiency and their battery charging architecture is not great, which surprises me a bit. They have hit it out of the park with the RAV4 Prime, though, which has good range and lots of power, and is the second fastest Toyota in existence now.
Yeah, and our friend Mark in Toronto owns a Toyota Prius Prime, got one very recently. But as our caller said, this is 20. Oh yeah, I think we haven't spoke extensively, but he owned Priuses before that, and seems happy with the Prime.
See, I'm sorry, but it seems like that's the next progression for us, right? I mean, I test drove one, and it wasn't prime in winter. It was minus 16 Celsius. It gets a lot colder than that, but you call that an average winter day for us here. Minus 14, I think, actually. And it was not electric. It was gas. The gas came on because it could not handle it.
It was too cold.
It was too cold. It needed some heat from the friction of the engine to add to the heater, and that's the way it worked. The Volt does not do that.
Also, the nice thing about it has a fairly large battery. I'm not sure the size, but it's so large it qualifies for the full $5,000 EV rebate that we have here in Canada.
That's the RAV4 you're talking about, right?
Yeah, the RAV4.
Not the Prime. The Prime is a small battery. It's only 40 kilometers on a good day.
Okay.
Yeah. So the one thing I really was convinced about electric cars is because the best thing about a Toyota is when it runs in electric mode, when it turns off the engine and you have just the electricity. And, it's just, you never want to go back to that. And I'm hesitant about hybrids. Like Toyota's still incomprehensibly pushing hydrogen, which is never going to take off, people, not for small transportation. It's just not. The infrastructure, we were talking last week to transport it had to be 4 degrees above 0 Kelvin, 4 degrees above absolute zero to transport it. And it's worse than a vaccine, for God's sake. So the Toyota's offering is not even as big as the competition. It's not even the size of an ID4. It's not even the size of a Model Y or a Mach-E. So it's not even family friendly. It's just a city car for small people, I guess.
But as our caller said, 2023 is what he was talking about for fully electric. So that sounds to me like a ground up electric SUV for Toyota and Lexus. So it will take them a couple of years, but it sounds like this is the start of their, building one from the ground up instead of just a compliance.
John is talking about hiring 1,500 people and all that. That's good. I think that when Toyota sells cars 5 years from now, those are the cars that they'll be selling. So good to be working at that factory and not the Tundra factory or something like that, where they're ages away from electrifying trucks, I think, which we talked about last week with the Ford F-150 and compared it to the Cybertruck and so on. I'm not convinced that their heart's in it. I'm really not convinced, based on how willy-nilly their press announcements have been about their upcoming electrification. They're not specific. They say it's coming next year, but they have no details. When you announce something that's coming next year, or even at the end of this year, by then you have the details. When you're Tesla, you have a prototype that you can drive around and say it's going to get this much EPA probably, and this size of battery, and things like that. We don't know. And this is true for all of the Japanese automotive makers, including Subaru. Toyota is partnering with Subaru to make electrified vehicles in Japan because they don't want to put any effort into it. Both companies are just doing as little as possible. Honda, same thing. Mitsubishi, which I can't say properly apparently. I have a speech impediment when it comes to multi-syllable words. Same thing there. I just think the Japanese automakers are insular, and they're the incumbents. Things are going well for them. They have no idea that the battery electric, even though they're working on, they're against EVs for some reason. I'm sorry, but they are. And they would be the first EV that I would buy. And I've been, our lease is up a year from now. I was hoping Toyota, I would just like to move up to an EV from you. But I have a feeling that may not be the case.
Well, as I said many episodes ago, I think the only two American cars I've owned are an AMC Gremlin and a Tesla, which is a weird progression. But I always loved Japanese cars because, when we were kids in the 70s, they were the ones that were disrupting things and putting out great, interesting, new, unusual, different vehicles.
Now, speaking of that, there's been some talk about Hyundai as well going all in on EVs, but they've been very good at EVs because they actually beat for Tesla for a short time efficiency. They were the king of efficiency, even though they hadn't built much in the way of electric cars. But they're talking about going all electric by 2040, which is like, eye roll. 2040, come on. Who's going to want to buy a combustion engine 5 years from now, let alone 20? Come on, people.
Apparently, they haven't heard that our podcast is going to 2030.
Maybe it's the Australian problem. Maybe people aren't listening to us in Korea or Japan.
Yeah, that's probably it.
I have not heard from anybody in Korea and Japan yet. If you're listening in Korea, Japan, you are obligated to send us a message. Like I said, speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show. You can leave us a voicemail on any device. You can re-record it if you like. If you don't like the way it sounded, do not commit it to anything. And it gives us free content for the show. John gave us 43 seconds of content that we did not have to come up with. That was quality family time for me this week because I could spend more time with my family.
Now, that's great. While we're on the topic of Hyundai and Kia, their sister company, I just wanted to mention that they have revealed the pricing for the Kia EV6, which is their SUV or crossover electric car that's coming out. It will be this is the first edition, so there will be other, I think, less expensive models coming out, but the first one is going to be available at $58,500. This is a really excellent all-wheel drive car with a 77 kilowatt battery. This is very comparable to Tesla Model Y in terms of size and features and so forth, and coming in slightly cheaper than the Model Y. So, I just wanted to mention that out because I've really been curious as to what the pricing is. I mean, that's still pretty high, so we've got to wait for the other models to be announced, and hopefully those come in at a more affordable price. But, all these other car companies are going to have a difficult time competing with Tesla, who appears to have a battery supply sewn up at a lower price than everybody else. So, even though the Tesla is, kind of a premium vehicle, Kia has often made their reputation by putting out cars that are less expensive than the competition. And, that is going to be the case here. But I don't know, they're going to struggle because they don't have that necessarily the cheap battery supply that Tesla has.
Yeah, it's time for the EV of the week. I was going to make it the Lexus, but let's talk about the Model S Plaid that's coming out. It's been delayed to June 10th unveiling, 1 week, for tweaking, apparently. Tesla showed off the Model S Plaid. That is their largest sedan, for those of you new to the EV world. The Plaid is the faster, sportier version that is new than previous sportier versions, and they announced that as part of their Battery Day presentation last September. It's a step up from Tesla's ludicrous trim level. It can reach 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than 2 seconds, which would kill me. And we've discussed this before on the show. It would literally kill me. I would pass out and crash into a tree. Reaching top speeds of 200 miles per hour. And according to Musk, the current specs on the website show the Plaid will have a range between 390 and 412 miles. That's up to 660 kilometers, which is, Brian Stockton, a fair bit of travel.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's, I guess, going to be, probably 3 weeks from now. The announcement, June 10th, that'll be the day after we record a podcast.
Damn it.
So the timing isn't great, but we'll be certainly able to talk about it more after we hear the announcement. But this is, I think I said it last week, potentially the fastest production car in history. So, that's going to be a big deal, this launch event.
So Tesla, the 660 kilometers is great, but they're going to have an extended range coming later at 520 miles or 837 kilometers. And if anyone is listening at Tesla, please try and announce your stuff on Tuesday night. Tuesday nights, because we record Wednesday mornings.
That's much better for us.
Yeah, much better for us, and you'll get a bigger bang for your buck if we are able to cover it the next day, because, we're the go-to podcast for this type of thing, Brian. Honestly, where else would you go? Australia? No. So, but the Plaid purchase price is starting at $119,990. Oh, let's call it $120,000 US, and the Plaid Plus is only $150,000. So that's a pricey car, but it gets people excited, gets car people talking, and every time an electric car blows the smoke out of the competition, that's a good thing, Brian.
Yeah, no, this is a halo car for them. Low volume sales, so it doesn't affect their bottom line all that much. But, it's a big deal to have the fastest production car ever.
So 7-Eleven is apparently serving up Slurpees and electrons.
Yeah, so they've announced a plan to install 500 EV charging stations by the end of 2022, which is not that far away. This is across North America, so the U.S. and Canada. 7-Eleven is a pretty big chain here in Canada. I grew up on Slurpees. I know you probably did too.
I grew out on Slurpees.
And there has been, of course, gas stations at a lot of 7-Elevens. And now they're just going to put in fast chargers as well. So, 500 fast chargers is, pretty decent for North America.
Yes, and you can go in and lounge around the 7-Eleven and eye up the hot dogs and see if they look suitable or poisonous. And look at the ice cream fridge, as I would, maybe some of the individual candies. Buy a lottery ticket.
I've never eaten any of the food at 7-Eleven. Have you?
Yes,
like the pizza or the hot dogs?
I went through a phase at university, and I'm ashamed of this, of eating 7-Eleven cheeseburgers, which you microwaved in the...
Oh, my.
They were weird and wrong, and I tended to... I was into them. I don't know, they were like $1 each or something, and I was poor.
Yeah.
And I just went through this phase, and I'm probably, it's amazing I haven't died from that yet, but I don't know if they're still in my colon or not. I have had a couple of colonoscopies, and they didn't say anything, so I'm assuming they're not there. Coming up in a moment, it's the lightning round. And that's where we're going to go through the headlines very quickly of some of the things that we've missed. But Brian, you also wanted to talk about the EV tax credit that may be increasing in the United States. Is something phenomenal.
Yeah, so this is not finalized yet, so I'm always somewhat reticent to talk about something that actually hasn't passed, but I think this gives us a rough idea of what the U.S. is in store for in terms of EV tax credits. So they have had this $7,500 tax credit for electric vehicles for quite a long time now, but there was a cap on it, so Tesla's no longer eligible for this, and General Motors is no longer eligible. They've sold quite a few Chevy Bolts. So as part of the COVID recovery, the kind of, Green New Deal kind of stuff that's happening in the U.S., they've announced a tax credit up to $12,500 for electric cars, and it's going to be in place until 50% of U.S. car sales are electric. So this is a potentially huge subsidy that's going to go on for, certainly the next several years, I would say.
That is a big difference between, 100,000 vehicles or units from a company, and then you lose the credit? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was a bit more than that, but yeah.
And Tesla has lost that for a year or two now? Completely? It was phased out for Tesla, and I think, has GM lost it?
Yeah, GM has lost it, and it hasn't really affected Tesla's sales. In fact, you could argue they don't really even need this subsidy, but certainly the other players that are kind of new to the game are going to benefit. But, they couldn't cut Tesla out of it, even though they don't really need it. And Musk was arguing for a carbon tax rather than for a subsidy. But the one thing that they did do, or so far, again, this hasn't passed yet, is Tesla would only be eligible for up to $10,000 because it's the $7,500 minimum, and then another $2,500 if it's assembled in the U.S., which Tesla does. But then you're going to get another $2,500 possible tax credit if the car is union made.
Really?
And so basically this
That's
from
bold.
Yeah, it comes from probably the, senators and governors in Michigan. That's where all the unionized car plants are. So this will be a bigger benefit to the Michigan-based auto companies. So Tesla is not unionized. Volkswagen, which is making quite a few ID4s somewhere in the southern U.S., they are also not unionized. Really? So, Tesla and Volkswagen, their subsidy would top out at $10,000, which is still enormous. But the traditional automakers like Ford and GM, their credit should go up to $12,500.
That seems really controversial. Like even for people buying, there's a lot of anti-union sentiment whipped up from right-wing Facebook and right-wing media, and I'm surprised. Actually, it's the first I've heard of it. So,
well, there were sort of rumors, I don't know. Biden has been talking a lot about unions since he was elected. And they are, of course, the party that's supposed to represent labor. So it shouldn't come as a huge surprise that they did something like this. But yeah, I was just wondering how they would do it, or how you would maybe steer more money towards certain players, and away from Tesla, because like I say, they don't really need the subsidy. But you can't, I don't know. It's difficult to create a rule that just cuts out one company, and they haven't. But it does steer a bit more money to companies other than Tesla and Volkswagen.
Well, if you would like to contact us, like I said, I'm going to repeat the speak pipe because we love the speak pipe. Speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show to leave us a voicemail, just like John Doe did from the southern U.S. with a Toyota factory insight, and email cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We love emails as well. On Twitter, we are Clean Energy Pod, and on TikTok, we are Clean Energy Pod. Yes, TikTok. Brian and I don't understand TikTok. We're middle-aged men. But we're on TikTok, and by God, people are watching our videos on TikTok. So we're going to, maybe more in the fall, because, I'm lazy in the summer, but we'll get some TikTok videos going. It helps grow the podcast and all that. So it's time for the lightning round.
The Clean Energy Show lightning round.
Tesla has filed a new trademark for its brand under restaurant services, as the automaker is expected to expand amenities around its charging infrastructure, including actual restaurants, which we've heard about for a couple of years and we're excited by. Then it went away. Now it's back. Are you excited, Brian?
Yeah, I think some kind of they've been talking about a 50s style diner at a Tesla Supercharger. This makes tons of sense. I don't know, maybe it would be, servers on roller skates or something. I don't know if they'll go that far, but I don't know. You can't go wrong with some place that sells like burgers and shakes, and people out of a supercharger have just enough time to eat something like that. So this seems like a slam dunk to me. It's just Tesla has so many balls in the air. Do they have time to actually get this rolling and get it working? But, hopefully they do. I think it'd be fun.
I had this idea a few years ago. I put it on Facebook. It was like, I want to start a charging station / restaurant, diner style. And it would include, the big thing about it would be the bathrooms would be very clean, and everybody would have their own door to the bathroom. So you have an individual bathroom, it'd be clean, and robots would wash them or something. I don't know. It would just be sprayed down constantly. And it would just be easy you'd have Wi-Fi, of course. But this is when I thought, you have a captive audience for 45 minutes. That's going to go away. We might get to 5-minute charging, not too far from now.
It's true. You do have to sort of plan for the future, and yeah, charging will get faster. So that is going to be an issue.
So in that case, what you want is basically a Starbucks. You want a good bathroom, some Wi-Fi, and coffee to keep you going, or something like that, or a snack, or not necessarily a burger and a shake where we're at now. So, this is a bit of an aside, but I was trying to, my son said to me, I was talking about electric cars, and he said to me, well, how are you going to get to Calgary? I'm not buying an electric car unless I can get to Calgary. Now how far are we from Calgary? 665 kilometers, 400 miles or something, 500 miles. 500 miles.
Well, it's around an 8-hour drive.
It's basically a day drive. So it is what we equivalent to what you can handle on a vacation. You go to Calgary. You stop at Calgary. We have relatives there, so we're always going to Calgary. And then I looked at the cars, and I'm going to talk about it on a future show. There's not many that do it well. You know, Tesla do, because Teslas charge fast. They got lots of chargers. Some of the old used Model S's don't do it very well. There's like little parts in the highway where you do a better road planner or something like that, and it'll color it orange or red and say, we don't know if you can make it in this segment, or you might have to drive 70 kilometers on this segment an hour. Very slow in order to make it. And there's not a lot of cars that are doing it well, but there are a few that do.
No, and we discussed this last summer when I drove to Vancouver, and I can definitely say in my car, Tesla Model 3, getting to Calgary easy in one day. I did around 1,100 kilometers in the first day, which is well past Calgary, like an 11-hour drive. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, it's definitely an issue. Like, these third-party chargers, other vehicles, don't charge as fast as Teslas. But, I've more or less decided I really only want to drive about 4 hours in a day. So this has kind of become a non-issue for me. I don't, even driving 8 hours to Calgary in one day, that's too much.
You drop 10 grand Canadian on the full self-driving, and you're still limited to the 4 hours a day, you lazy bum, with your pillow in your back? Come on.
Yeah, I'm lazy. What can I say?
Come on. Seriously, you would do more than 4 hours if it drove itself, wouldn't you?
Listen, I once drove from Regina to Los Angeles nonstop for 24 hours straight with a friend. So, we traded off driving and sleeping, and that was a terrible idea. That was a really dumb thing to do. 24 hours straight.
Yeah. Well, I've done trips down there 14 hours as a middle-aged man with kids. And I was the only driver. So you go cross-eyed, and I would have loved for the car just to take over for 20 minutes and just rest my eyes. That would have been wonderful. Or it'd been tempting with autopilot just to tune out, and you're not supposed to do that. So that's one thing about current autopilot technology. Anyway, we're out of time, Brian. So headline from Bloomberg that I saw yesterday reads, employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home, which affects how much gas we use and how much pollution we make. So people, I thought it was interesting that people are, have you heard anything about this in your circles of people not wanting to go back to work?
Oh yeah. This is a big discussion that's going to be happening. It's going to be a real negotiation, I think, because, certain people are not going to want to go back to the office, but how much do you want to force them? This is going to be a huge issue, and things are starting to open up. People here in Canada will be going back to their offices probably in a month or two. It's probably already happening in the U.S. I don't know what's, and how much, as an employer, how much are you going to fight for that? How much is it important? I don't know. I think employees should probably do whatever they want, but I have a feeling that some employers are going to, want them to come anyway to work.
Well, here's another example of electrified transportation having advantages over the old way. There's an electric hydrofoil water taxi that was unveiled. It costs 85% less than gas boats to run, which is really significant because, you and I don't have a lot of boating experience, but boats use a lot of gas to plunge through the water. They're basically parting the Red Sea every time they want to go from A to B. You really have to. Well, anyway, this sucker uses electricity and basically hovers because it's a hydrofoil above the water. So you're not having that drag from the water. You're hovering above it. And it actually has less noise, even though it's doing that. A smoother ride and the ability to transverse waters without leaving a wake, which is a big deal. Because if you leave a wake, you damage wildlife and the marine wildlife and other vessels. And so they don't let you travel fast. But if you don't have a wake, you hover above the water and fly around, it's okay. And you do it quietly. So that's just one more advantage of electrified transportation.
No, I think hydrofoils are really cool. Like, you think about how much drag there is, dragging a boat through the water. And then there's also possibly, headwinds and so forth. So hydrofoils eliminate a lot of that. It's I saw that story. It's a super cool machine.
So finally this week, Tesla's onboard cameras help police arrest a suspect who was terrorizing drivers with random car shootings in Southern California. The investigation has been ongoing for weeks. This guy's been going around shooting at people and breaking windows dangerously, almost killing them with pellet guns or something. And it wasn't until the attacker went after a Tesla that police managed to find him. You don't go after a Tesla, you stupid, stupid criminal. Because Teslas, Brian, they have 8 cameras, which could always be running. And this, he was taken into custody after the Tesla driver had his window shot out near an intersection in Norco, California. And because of the high-end nature of Tesla, auto authorities say the onboard camera captured the video of the suspect red SUV, and he's in jail.
Yeah, you just have to remember to hit the record button. And as soon as you do that, it saves the previous 10 minutes worth of video footage. And you can also set it so the horn does that as well. Every time you honk the horn, it will save the previous 10 minutes of video.
And it can run in Sentry mode constantly, which you did not have running when you were in Vancouver last year and someone stole your bike out of the Tesla, which was just a set of terrible circumstances.
You know, I was thinking that's probably the only time the car has ever been unlocked, because it locks itself automatically. Like the one night in the history of owning that car, somehow through some weird circumstance, it didn't lock itself when I walked away and Sentry mode was not on. The one night it was unlocked.
Let's face it, Sentry mode wouldn't have helped you anyway, because random people stealing bikes are seldomly hunted down by the police. Anyway, that's our time for this week. We want to thank you for joining us for our weekly conversation about everything new in clean tech and transportation. We'll begin another podcast next Wednesday, Brian. So we'll see you then.
Yeah, see you next week.